She had 30 seconds to decide: let a stranger die, or throw away everything she'd ever known. The rain didn't just fall on Seoul that night, it attacked. It hammered the Midnight Noodle's windows like fists demanding entry, turning the neon chaos outside into a bleeding watercolor nightmare of electric pink and poisonous blue. Joan Perkins could taste the storm in the air, metallic, violent, wrong. Her hands moved on autopilot, scrubbing the same phantom stain on the counter she'd been chasing for the last 20 minutes. Muscle memory. Survival mode. Her brain had checked out an hour ago, already on the night bus home, already peeling off this grease-stained uniform, already collapsing into her mattress on the floor of a studio apartment she could barely afford. 43 minutes. That's all she had left of this shift. Of this life. The bell above the door didn't chime, it screamed. Joan's head snapped up, and everything inside her went still. Predator still. Prey still. The kind of still that happens when your body recognizes danger before your brain catches up. Two men stood in the doorway like they'd materialized from the storm itself. Water streamed off suits that cost more than Joan made in 6 months, pooling on the cracked linoleum in perfect, accusatory circles. But it wasn't the suits that made Joan's stomach drop. It was their eyes. Cold, calculating, the eyes of men who'd killed before and would kill again without breaking stride. The one in front had silver hair slicked back from a face too young for all that gray. Handsome in the way poisonous things are beautiful right before they kill you. He surveyed the diner with the casual interest of someone deciding which part to burn first. "We're looking for someone." His English was perfect, his Korean accent wrapping around each word like silk over a blade. A woman. Mid-50s, expensive taste, probably traveling alone. His smile was a surgical incision. "Have you seen her?" Joan's fingers white-knuckled around the rag. Every instinct she'd honed from years of working late shifts in bad neighborhoods was shrieking at her to lie, to look away, to become invisible. "We don't give out information about customers," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Company policy." The silver-haired man's smile widened, and Joan saw her death in it. Company policy. He tasted the words like they amused him. How American, how adorably naive. He took a step forward, his companion mirroring him like a shadow. "Let me explain something about policy." Glass shattered. Not in the diner. Outside. Across the rain-flooded street. A taxi door flew open so hard it cracked against its hinges. A woman spilled out fell out, catching herself on the door frame with one hand while the other clutched her side where crimson bloomed across expensive black fabric like a deadly flower. Even through the storm, even across the distance, Joan could see her face. Elegant, refined, silver hair escaping from what had once been a perfect updo, and terrified, so terrified that for one suspended moment, the woman looked less like a human and more like a cornered animal deciding whether to fight or die. Their eyes met across the drowning street. The woman's lips moved. One word, silent, desperate. "Help. Welcome to Ruthless Romance Tales. And honey, you just stepped into something you can't unsee. If you've been riding with me, you know we don't do safe here, we do dangerous. We do addictive. We do the kind of love that brands your soul and refuses to let go. And if you're new, buckle the hell up. Because what you're about to witness is a collision so violent, so inevitable, it'll rewrite everything you thought you knew about romance. Hit that like button like your life depends on it. Subscribe because you're already hooked, and smash that notification bell, because missing what comes next would be a crime. Now let's watch this waitress burn her whole world down." The men in suits turned as one, tracking Joan's gaze like wolves scenting blood. "Ah." The silver-haired man's voice dropped into something that might have been satisfaction or might have been hunger. Hard to tell the difference with predators. "There she is." He moved toward the door. Joan moved faster. She didn't think. Couldn't think. Because thinking meant acknowledging what she was about to do. And acknowledging it meant recognizing it for the suicide it was. Her hand shot out, fingers closing around the industrial kettle on the burner behind her 5 gallons of water at a rolling boil, heavy as a bowling ball, hot enough to scar. The silver-haired man was 2 steps from the door. 1 step. Joan hurled the kettle not at him. Strategy overriding panic at the ceiling fan rotating lazily above his head. Time fractured. The kettle hit the fan with a metallic crack that echoed like a gunshot. Water exploded outward in a scalding cascade, droplets catching the fluorescent light like 1,000 falling stars. Then the electricity hit the water and the world went white. Sparks, smoke, the sharp chemical smell of burning circuits and boiling rage. The silver-haired man's scream was more animal than human. Joan was already moving. Over the counter, sneakers hitting wet linoleum, her coworker Jerome's shocked face a blur in her peripheral vision as she sprinted for the door. She registered his mouth opening, registered the kettle still spinning on the floor, registered the second man reaching inside his jacket for something that would definitely end her life. "Call the cops," she shouted, not knowing if he heard, not caring, because she was already outside, already in the rain that hit her like a baptism, already running toward the woman across the street. The woman was moving too, stumbling forward, one hand still pressed to the spreading crimson at her side, the other reaching out like Joan was salvation itself. They collided in the middle of the street, Joan catching her weight, feeling the woman's blood hot and sick against her uniform. "I've got you," Joan gasped, already pulling her toward the alley beside the diner. "I've got—" The diner door exploded open behind them. "Move!" Joan didn't recognize her own voice. Stripped raw with adrenaline and terror, she half-carried, half-dragged the woman into the alley's mouth, into the narrow darkness where neon bled crimson and blue and the rain fell so hard it felt like the sky was trying to drown them. Behind them, footsteps, shouting in Korean. The metallic click-click of a round being chambered. The alley was a river. Garbage floated past like urban debris from a shipwreck. Joan's sneakers lost purchase. Found it, lost it again. The woman was dead weight now, consciousness flickering like a candle in a hurricane. "Stay with me," Joan commanded, her old nursing training surfacing through the panic. "Stay awake. You hear me? Stay." Headlights cut through the darkness ahead like judgment itself. A black Mercedes materialized at the alley's end, sleek and predatory, blocking their escape. For one crystalline moment, Joan thought, "This is it. This is how I die." In a Seoul alley, 26 years old, holding a stranger, my mother never knowing what happened to me, the Mercedes's door flew open. A voice cut through the storm, harsh, commanding, speaking rapid Korean that Joan's terrified brain couldn't begin to parse. But the woman in her arms sobbed, actually sobbed with relief so profound it was almost obscene. "Get in," the woman gasped in English, her fingers suddenly iron around Joan's wrist. You come not safe. I don't even know you." The gunshot answered for her. It didn't hit them. Missed by inches, maybe less, sparking off the brick wall beside Joan's head close enough that she felt the heat, close enough that her ears rang with it, close enough to make the decision for her. Joan threw them both toward the Mercedes. They tumbled into leather seats that smelled like money and violence. The door wasn't even closed before the car was moving, tires finding impossible purchase on flooded pavement, the world outside becoming a neon blur of rain and rage and bullets that sparked off metal like deadly fireflies. Joan's back hit the opposite door, her chest heaving, her uniform soaked through with rain and someone else's blood. The woman beside her was speaking, crying, bleeding, speaking in Korean so fast it sounded like prayer or confession or both. The driver was stone-faced, terrifying, his hands steady on the wheel as he took a corner at a speed that should have flipped them. And Joan pressed her hands to her face and tried to remember how to breathe. What did I just do? What the hell did I just do? The woman's hand found hers in the darkness, slick with blood, trembling but strong. Joan looked up, meeting eyes that were somehow both grateful and apologetic, like the woman knew exactly what Joan had just sacrificed and was sorry for it. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her English breaking. "You saved my life. You saved." A cough, wet and concerning. "You don't know what you've done." Joan squeezed back, her nursing instincts overriding her terror. "You're losing too much blood. We need a hospital. Now." The woman smiled, sad and knowing. "Yes, hospital." She said something in Korean to the driver, who nodded once, then back to Joan. "But not police. No police. You understand? What happened tonight you can never tell." "I don't understand anything," Joan said. And it was possibly the most honest thing she'd ever said in her life. "You will." The woman's eyes were already closing, consciousness slipping. "My son, he will explain. He will—" Another wet cough. "He will come for me. For us. And when you see him, you will understand everything." The Mercedes carved through Seoul like a knife through shadow, carrying Joan Perkins toward a future she couldn't imagine, toward a man she hadn't met, toward a destiny written in blood and rain and a split-second choice she could never, ever take back. Somewhere behind them, the silver-haired assassin was making a phone call. Somewhere ahead, a man was about to learn his mother had been attacked. And somewhere in between, Joan pressed her hands harder against the woman's wound and realized the most terrifying truth of all. She didn't regret it. She'd do it again. God help her. She'd do it again. The adrenaline hit her in waves, hot, then cold, then nothing at all. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The woman's blood was already drying sticky between her fingers. And somewhere in the animal part of her brain, Joan registered that she should feel horror, should feel regret, should feel something other than this crystalline, terrifying clarity. She'd just crossed a line that didn't have a way back. The Mercedes sliced through soul like a blade through silk, the city's neon bleeding into watercolor smears against the tinted windows. Joan's breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers digging into the leather seat as the driver took corners at speeds that defied physics. The woman beside her, Song Se-dong, though Joan didn't know her name, yet pressed a silk scarf against the wound in her side, her face pale but composed. Like bleeding out in the back of a speeding car was just another Tuesday evening. Joan's mind was still catching up to her body. 5 minutes ago she'd been wiping down counters. Now she was an accomplice to something she didn't understand. Trapped in a car with a bleeding stranger and a stone-faced driver who looked like he killed people for a living. Her pink waitress uniform clung to her skin, soaked through with rain and fear. Her natural hair was a damp halo around her face, droplets sliding down her brown skin like tears she refused to shed. "Where are we going?" Joan asked, her voice hoarse. The woman turned to her, and despite the pain etched in the lines around her mouth, her eyes were sharp, assessing. "Somewhere safe." Her English was heavily accented but clear. "You saved my life. Twice. I didn't. I just reacted. Reaction or choice. The result is the same." The woman's grip on the scarf tightened as the car hit a bump. Fresh blood seeped through the silk. "You made yourself part of this now. There is no going back." Those words settled over Joan like a shroud. No going back. She looked out the window at Seoul, rushing past a city she'd moved to with dreams of finishing her degree, of building something better. Now those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else. Some naive girl who thought throwing boiling water at armed men was heroism instead of suicide. They pulled up to a private entrance Joan had never seen before, the kind without signs or public access, the kind where people arrived in the dead of night and questions were never asked. The driver was out before the car fully stopped, opening the door for the woman with a reverence that made Joan's stomach clench. This wasn't just any woman. This was someone who commanded empires. Joan scrambled out after her, instinct overriding fear. Her nursing training, rusty but not dead, kicked in as she supported the woman's weight, noting the pallor of her skin, the shallow breathing, the way she was starting to lean too heavily. Internal bleeding, maybe. They needed to move fast. Inside, the hospital was all white marble and hushed efficiency. It looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Nurses appeared like ghosts in designer scrubs, whisking the woman away on a gurney. A nurse tried to guide Joan to a waiting room, but Joan shook her head. "I'm staying with her." The nurse looked at the woman, who nodded once despite her pain. Joan followed them into the sterile brightness of an operating room, scrubbing in with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She watched as surgeons worked with practiced efficiency, the kind that said this wasn't their first bullet extraction. The woman's eyes never left Joan's face, even as anesthesia pulled her under. It was a look that said, "I see you. I own you now." 3 hours later, the woman was stable, sleeping in a private recovery room that felt more like a penthouse suite. Joan sat in a chair by the window, still wearing her damp uniform, watching the sunrise paint Seoul in shades of gold and blood. She should leave, walk out, disappear into the city before whatever this was became permanent. But something told her it was already too late. The door opened, and Joan's entire world shifted on its axis. Song Kang-yeon didn't enter rooms, he claimed them. He was tall, impossibly so, his frame filling the doorway like a threat made flesh. His black suit was immaculate despite the late hour, tailored to a body that promised violence beneath expensive fabric. His face was all sharp angles and cold beauty, high cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, eyes so dark they looked black in the dim light. But it was the energy rolling off him that made Joan's breath catch. Power? Absolute, terrifying, suffocating power. His gaze swept the room, landing on his mother first with a flicker of something almost human relief. Maybe, or the ghost of fear before those eyes locked onto Joan. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Joan stood slowly, her body recognizing a predator even if her mind was still catching up. This was the sun. This had to be. He moved toward her with fluid grace, closing the distance until Joan could smell him, expensive cologne layered over something darker. Smoke and steel and danger. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "You saved her life," he said, his voice low and dark, accented English wrapped around each word like velvet over razor wire. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Joan lifted her chin, refusing to back down even though every survival instinct screamed at her to run. She needed help. I helped. His eyes narrowed, studying her face with an intensity that felt like being dissected. He took in her brown skin, still damp from rain, her full lips pressed together in defiance, the curve of her throat where her pulse hammered visibly. His gaze was clinical, assessing, but there was something beneath it, something that made Joan's stomach tighten with a feeling she couldn't name. "Do you know who she is?" he asked, each word precise and weighted. "No. Should I?" Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or dark amusement. "Song Se-dong, my mother, the matriarch of the Song family." He paused, watching her process that information, watching the color drain from her face. "You interfered in an assassination attempt on the most powerful woman in Seoul's criminal underground. You made yourself a witness, a liability." Joan's heart was a war drum in her chest. "So what happens now? You kill me to tie up loose ends?" He moved closer, so close now that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the way his pupils dilated slightly. "If I wanted you dead, you would be dead already." His voice dropped lower, intimate and threatening. "No, you present a different problem entirely." His hand came up slowly, deliberately. Joan didn't flinch. His fingers caught a strand of her damp hair, rubbing the coil between his fingers like he was testing the texture, the reality of her. His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with everything else about him. "You're American," he said, still playing with her hair, his eyes never leaving hers. "A foreigner working in a cheap noodle shop. Former nursing student, I'm guessing. No family here. No protection. No one who would miss you if you disappeared." Each word was a threat wrapped in velvet. "You should be terrified of me." "I am," Joan whispered, and it was the truth. But beneath the terror was something else. Something hot and sharp that made her skin feel too tight. His eyes flashed, something dangerous and hungry moving behind them. His hand slid from her hair to her jaw, tilting her face up, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Brave. Or stupid. I haven't decided which. Can it be both?" His mouth curved, not quite a smile, too sharp for that. Dangerous combination. His thumb traced lower, along her jaw, down to the pulse point in her throat where he could feel her heartbeat racing. He pressed there lightly, a reminder that he could end her with one precise movement. "You have no idea what you've walked into, Joan Perkins." She blinked, shock cutting through the strange tension between them. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything." He released her abruptly, stepping back, and Joan had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. "Your full name, your address, your expired visa, your student loans, the mother you send money to every month back in Virginia, the nursing program you dropped out of because you couldn't afford it." He adjusted his cuffs, casual, like he hadn't just stripped her bare without touching her. "I own this city. That means I own everyone in it, including you." Before Joan could respond, Madame Song stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips. Kang Yeon was at his mother's bedside in 2 strides, his face transforming, still hard, still dangerous, but with a softness around the edges that spoke of genuine devotion. He spoke to her in rapid Korean, his voice gentler than Joan would have thought possible. Madame Song's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they landed on her son. She smiled, reaching up to touch his face, speaking in Korean too fast for Joan to follow. Then her gaze shifted past him, finding Joan in the shadows. "The girl," Madame Song said in English, her voice hoarse but commanding. "Bring her here." Kang Yeon's jaw tightened, but he obeyed, gesturing for Joan to approach. Joan moved forward on legs that felt like water, stopping at the opposite side of the bed. Up close, even pale and wounded, Madame Song radiated authority. Madame Song reached out, taking Joan's hand in hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You saved my life. Twice. Once in the diner, once in the alley." Her eyes, so like her son's, bored into Joan's. "In our world, a debt like that is sacred. It must be repaid." "You don't owe me anything," Joan said quickly. "I was just quiet." The command was soft but absolute. Madame Song looked at her son, then back at Joan, and something calculated moved across her face. "The men who attacked me tonight, they won't stop. They know I was with someone. They'll be looking for witnesses. For you." Joan's stomach dropped. "Then I'll leave. I'll go back to the States. They'll find you." Kang Yeon's voice was flat, factual. "Before you even make it to the airport." Madame Song squeezed Joan's hand. "But if you were family, if you were under our protection, they wouldn't dare touch you." She paused, watching Joan's face. "My son needs a wife." The room went very, very still. Joan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Kang Yun, who'd gone rigid, his expression unreadable but his eyes blazing with fury. Mother, you're 34 years old, Kang Yun. The other families are circling because you have no heir, no alliance through marriage. They see a man alone as a man vulnerable. Madame Song's voice was steel wrapped in silk. This girl saved my life. She's brave, quick-thinking, and loyal. She'll do. She's a waitress, Kang Yun bit out. An American. She knows nothing of our world. Then teach her. Madame Song's eyes glittered. Or would you prefer I arrange a marriage with the Choi family's daughter? The one who reports every whisper to her father? The silence that followed was suffocating. Joan felt like she was drowning, like her life was being decided by forces she couldn't control. I'm standing right here, she said, her voice shaking but loud. And I'm not marrying anyone. Both turned to look at her. Identical expressions of surprise on their faces. Kang Yun's eyes narrowed. You don't have a choice, he said softly, and the gentleness was more terrifying than any threat. My mother just made you a target by having this conversation where staff could hear. By morning, every criminal in Seoul will know she's planning to name you as my bride. They'll come for you to prevent the alliance, or to use you against us. Kang Yun moved closer, looming over her, his presence overwhelming. You can refuse and die, or you can accept and live. Choose. Joan looked at Madame Song, who watched her with cool assessment. Looked at Kang Yun, whose face was a mask of cold fury but whose eyes held something more complicated. Looked at the door, knowing there were probably guards outside, knowing she'd never make it past them. How long? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Until it's no longer politically useful, Madame Song said. A year. Maybe 2. Joan's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. So I'm a political move. A chess piece. Everyone is a chess piece, Kang Yun said. The only question is whether you're a pawn or a queen. Their eyes locked, and Joan felt it again, that pull, that dangerous current running between them. He was beautiful and terrible and absolutely lethal. And somehow, impossibly, she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of how much she wanted to say yes. Afraid of the part of her that was tired of running, tired of barely surviving, tired of being invisible. One condition, Joan said, lifting her chin. I'm not just decorative. I go back to school. I finish my nursing degree. I'm not going to be some trophy wife who sits around looking pretty. Kang Yun's eyes flashed with something respect maybe or challenge. Done. And I want my own bank account. My own money. Agreed. And I sleep in my own room. His smile was slow, predatory, devastating. For now, those 2 words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Joan's breath caught, her skin flushing hot despite the air conditioning. She hated herself for the way her body responded to him, to his proximity, to the dark gravity of him. Madame Song was smiling now, victorious. Then it settled. I'll make the announcement tomorrow. She squeezed Joan's hand one more time before releasing her. Welcome to the family, daughter. May you survive it. 3 days later, Joan stood in what was now her bedroom in Kang Yun's penthouse, staring at her reflection in a mirror that stretched from floor to ceiling. The room was twice the size of her entire studio apartment, all clean lines and cold luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River, the view so beautiful it felt like a taunt. A cage with a pretty view was still a cage. She'd been given a new wardrobe designer clothes in her size that fit perfectly because, of course, Kang Yun knew her measurements. She'd been assigned 2 guards who followed her everywhere, stone-faced men who spoke no English and answered to no one but their boss. She'd been told the rules. Don't leave without permission. Don't speak to the press. Don't do anything that would embarrass the Song family. She was a prisoner dressed in silk. The door to her bedroom opened without a knock. Kang Yun stood in the doorway, and Joan's heart stuttered despite herself. He discarded his suit jacket. His white shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that told stories of violence. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. He looked devastatingly, unfairly beautiful. We need to talk, he said, his voice rough. Joan crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware that she was wearing nothing but a silk robe one of the staff had left for her. You could have knocked. This is my home. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that felt far too intimate. Everything in it belongs to me, including you. I'm not property. No. He moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory. You're something far more complicated. He stopped close enough that Joan could smell the copper tang of blood beneath his expensive cologne. Her eyes dropped, finding the dark stain spreading across his white shirt, just above his ribs. Fresh, still bleeding. "You're hurt," she said, the words automatic, her nursing instincts overriding everything else. "It's nothing." But his voice was tight, controlled in a way that told her it was absolutely something. Joan moved before she could think better of it, reaching for his shirt. He caught her wrist, his grip iron. "Don't. You're bleeding all over your expensive floors." She met his eyes, refusing to back down. "Let me see it." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or the ghost of amusement. "You think I need a nursing school dropout to patch me up? I think you need someone who won't ask questions about how you got stabbed." Joan pulled her wrist free, her fingers already working the buttons of his shirt. "Unless you'd rather go to a hospital and explain this to the police." His hand covered hers, stopping her. For a moment, they stood frozen, her fingers trapped beneath his against the blood-soaked fabric of his shirt, his chest rising and falling beneath her touch. The air between them felt electric, charged with something that had nothing to do with the wound, and everything to do with the dangerous current that had been building since the moment they met. "You're not afraid of me," he said, and it sounded almost like an accusation. "I'm terrified of you." Joan's voice was barely a whisper. "But you're bleeding, and I know how to fix that. So either let me help or get out of my room." He released her hand. Joan finished unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the way her heart was racing. She pushed the fabric aside, revealing a body that was all hard muscle and brutal scars, a map of violence written across his skin. The knife wound was an angry slash along his ribs, deep enough to need stitches but not deep enough to be fatal. Whoever had done this had meant to hurt him, not kill him. "Sit," Joan commanded, gesturing to the bed. "Bossy for someone who's supposed to be my wife." "Sit down." To her shock, he obeyed, sinking onto the edge of her bed with a grace that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. Joan moved to the ensuite bathroom, gathering supplies: antiseptic, gauze, a needle and surgical thread she'd requested be stocked after she'd moved in. When she returned, Kang Yeon was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with heat. She knelt between his legs, close enough that her thighs brushed against his knees, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off his body. His sharp intake of breath when she pressed the antiseptic-soaked gauze to his wound wasn't from pain. She'd barely touched him. It was something else entirely. "This is going to hurt," Joan warned, threading the needle. "I've had worse." She believed him. The scars covering his torso told stories of knives and bullets and violence that should have killed him a dozen times over. But her hands were steady as she worked, stitching the wound with the precision of someone who'd done this before, who'd trained for this, even if she'd never finished her degree. Kang Yeon didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. He just watched her, his dark eyes tracking every movement of her hands, every flutter of her lashes, every time her tongue darted out to wet her lips in concentration. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating, thick with unspoken things. "Why did you agree?" he asked suddenly, his voice rough. "To marry me. You could have run." Joan's hands paused, the needle hovering above his skin. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You said they'd find me." "They would have. But you didn't know that for certain." His hand came up, fingers catching a coil of her hair that had escaped. "So why?" Joan's hands trembled, just once, before she forced them steady again. She returned to stitching, each pull of the thread deliberate, careful. "Because I'm tired of running," she said finally, her voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear. "I've been running my whole life. From poverty, from my father's debts, from the fact that I couldn't afford to finish school, from every dream I ever had that required money I didn't have." She tied off the last stitch, her fingers lingering against his skin longer than necessary. "At least here I'm running toward something instead of away." His hand tightened in her hair, not painful, but possessive. "And what are you running toward?" Joan looked up, meeting his gaze. The space between them felt like a held breath, like the moment before lightning strikes. "I don't know yet." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Joan was acutely aware of her position, kneeling between his legs, her hands resting on his bare torso, his fingers tangled in her hair. The silk robe had slipped off one of her shoulders, exposing the smooth brown skin of her collarbone. Kang Yeon's eyes dropped to that exposed skin, his jaw tightening. "You should finish," he said, his voice rougher than before. Joan blinked, breaking the spell. She wrapped the wound with gauze, her fingers brushing against the hard planes of his abdomen, feeling the way his muscles contracted beneath her touch. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, putting distance between them even though something in her chest protested the separation. "Keep it clean," she said, falling back into clinical detachment like armor. "Change the dressing twice a day." Watch for signs of infection, redness, swelling, fever. Come back in a week and I'll remove the stitches. So formal now, Kang Yan observed, standing. He didn't bother buttoning his ruined shirt, leaving it hanging open, a deliberate display of the body she'd just had her hands all over. A minute ago you were kneeling between my legs, and now you sound like you're giving discharge instructions. Heat flooded Joan's face, but she stood her ground. A minute ago I was treating a patient, now I'm done. Is that what I am to you? He stepped closer, backing her up against the bed. A patient? What else would you be? But her voice wavered, betraying her. His smile was dark, knowing. Liar. His hand came up, fingers trailing along her jaw, down her neck, stopping at the pulse point that hammered against his touch. Your body tells a different story than your mouth. Joan Perkins. Every time I get close to you, your heart races. Your pupils dilate. Your breathing changes. His thumb pressed lightly against her pulse. You feel it too, this thing between us. There's nothing between us except a forced engagement and a power imbalance. Joan's words were sharp, defensive, but her body leaned into his touch despite her brain screaming at her to move away. Keep telling yourself that. He released her abruptly, stepping back, and Joan felt the loss of his heat like a physical ache. Tomorrow, my mother wants you to move to the estate. She says it's safer there. There was an incident today. A sniper took a shot through the penthouse window. Someone tried to send a message. Joan's blood turned to ice. Someone tried to kill me? Someone tried to prove you're my weakness. His voice was cold, controlled, but his hands had curled into fists. Pack tonight. We leave at dawn. Madame Song's tour of the estate was less a welcome and more an indoctrination. She walked Joan through halls lined with portraits of dead ancestors who seemed to watch with judgment in their painted eyes. She showed her the formal dining room where alliances were forged over expensive wine and lies. She pointed out the West Wing where Kang Yan conducted his business, making it clear that Joan was never to enter uninvited. This family has survived for 3 generations by understanding one thing, Madame Song said, as they stood in the private courtyard, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens that smelled of jasmine and secrets. Power is not taken. It is earned through blood and sacrifice. She turned to Joan, her expression softer than usual but no less calculating. You saved my life. That earns you a place here, but keeping that place that requires something more. What more? Joan asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Loyalty. Absolute and unwavering. Madame Song reached out, touching Joan's cheek with surprising gentleness. My son is not an easy man to love. He's cold, brutal. He's done things that would make you run screaming if you knew the details. Her eyes held Joan's, searching. But he is mine, and now you are mine too, which means I will protect you with everything I have. But if you betray him, if you betray this family, the gentleness vanished, replaced by something that made Joan's blood run cold. I will end you myself. Joan's throat was dry, but she held the older woman's gaze. I won't betray him. Good. Madame Song's smile returned, warm and maternal as if she hadn't just threatened Joan's life. Come, let me show you your rooms. The ones you'll share with Kang Yon once you're properly married. Joan's heart stuttered. I thought we agreed separate rooms. For now, yes. But appearances matter, child. After the wedding, you'll be expected to share his quarters. To present a united front, Madame Song led her through a moon gate into a more private section of the estate. The families are watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. A husband and wife who sleep in separate wings of the house, that's a weakness. The rooms were stunning, a suite of interconnected spaces that blended traditional Korean aesthetics with modern luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private garden. A massive bed dominated the bedroom, draped in silk the color of midnight. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was intimate in a way that made Joan's skin prickle with awareness. He won't touch you, Madame Song said quietly, reading Joan's expression. Not until you're ready. My son has many flaws, but forcing a woman is not one of them. She paused, though I suspect it won't be long before you're the one doing the touching. Heat flooded Joan's face. That's not. Please, child. I've seen the way you look at each other. Like 2 wolves circling, trying to decide whether to fight or mate. Madame Song laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. It's good. Passion makes for stronger alliances. Just remember, in this world, love is a weapon. Make sure you know how to wield it. She left Joan alone in the suite, and Joan sank onto the edge of that enormous bed, her mind spinning. Through the windows, she could see Kang Yeon in the garden below, speaking with a man in a dark suit. Even from this distance, She could read the tension in his shoulders, the controlled violence in every movement. He was handling a problem, probably a lethal one. Joan touched the emerald silk of her dress, feeling the weight of everything she'd agreed to. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was becoming part of something ancient and dangerous and impossible to escape. And the most terrifying part was how much she wanted to stop fighting it. That evening, Joan found Kang Yun in the estate's private study, a room of dark wood and darker secrets. He stood at the window overlooking the gardens, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. He'd changed into black clothing, tactical pants, and a fitted shirt that looked more like armor than fabric. He was preparing for something violent. "You're going out," Joan said from the doorway. "Not a question." He didn't turn. "You should be resting." "I can't rest knowing you're about to do something that might get you killed." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Too honest, too revealing. That made him turn. His eyes found hers in the dim light, searching, assessing. "Would you care if I died?" Joan's heart hammered against her ribs. The truthful answer terrified her. "I'd care about being left alone in a house full of criminals with no protection." Liar. He set down his glass and crossed to her with that predatory grace that made her stomach tighten. "You'd care because despite everything, despite this being forced, despite me being exactly the kind of man you should run from, you feel something for me." He stopped close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the dangerous glitter in his dark eyes. "Admit it." "I don't have to admit anything to you." His hand came up, fingers catching her chin, tilting her face up to his. "You're right. You don't." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, a touch so gentle it felt like violence. "But you want to. I can see it in your eyes, the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching, the way your breath catches when I get close, the way you touched me when you stitched my wound like you wanted to memorize the feel of my skin." Joan's pulse was thunder in her ears. "You're imagining things. Am I?" His other hand slid around her waist, pulling her against him, and Joan gasped at the sudden contact, the hard planes of his body against her softer curves, the heat of him seeping through the thin fabric of her dress. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you don't think about what it would be like if I kissed you, if I touched you the way I want to touch you." His voice dropped lower, intimate, dangerous. "Tell me you don't lie awake at night wondering what it would feel like to let me in." Joan couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every nerve in her body was screaming at her to close the distance, to give in to the magnetic pull between them. But some stubborn part of her, the part that had survived poverty and abandonment, and every other hardship life had thrown at her, refused to surrender that easily. "I think," she said, her voice shaking but steady, "that you use intimidation and proximity as weapons because you're afraid of what happens if someone actually sees you. The real you. Not the mafia boss. Not the son trying to live up to his mother's legacy. Just Kang Yun, the man beneath all the violence." Something flickered across his face. Shock, maybe. Or pain. His grip on her waist tightened, then loosened. "You don't want to see that man, Joan. He's not worth saving. Maybe I'll decide that for myself." They stared at each other, the tension between them so thick Joan could barely breathe through it. Then Kang Yun's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He released her abruptly, stepping back, his mask of cold control sliding back into place. "I have to go," he said, his voice flat. "There's a situation that requires my attention. Stay in the estate. Don't leave the grounds. The guards have orders to shoot anyone who tries to breach the perimeter. Even me." His smile was sharp, humorless. "Especially you." The door exploded inward. 3 men poured into the suite, weapons raised, scanning for targets. Joan's breath stopped. Her finger found the trigger. The first man turned toward her hiding spot, his gun swinging in her direction. She fired. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but the shot found its mark center mass, just like Kang Yun had shown her during their brief moment. The man dropped. The other 2 spun toward her, and Joan fired again, then again, her nursing training making her eerily calm as she aimed for body mass, for the parts that would stop them fastest. One went down, the other dove behind the bed. Joan's gun clicked empty. Terror flooded her system, but she didn't freeze. She couldn't. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the dresser and waited. When the man emerged, confident she was unarmed, Joan swung with everything she had. The vase shattered against his temple. He crumpled. Joan stood there, shaking, staring at the 3 bodies, at the blood spreading across the expensive floors. She'd just killed 2 men. Maybe 3. She should feel something: horror, guilt, remorse. But all she felt was cold determination. They'd come for her. For Madame Song. For her family. Her family, when had she started thinking of them that way? Gunfire erupted from downstairs, a final, desperate volley, then silence. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Joan grabbed the gun from the first man's hand, checked the magazine. Still loaded. She raised it toward the door, her hands steady now, prepared to fight until her last breath. Kang Yeon appeared in the doorway, blood-spattered and wild-eyed. He took in the scene: Joan standing over 3 bodies, gun raised, her brown skin splattered with someone else's blood, her eyes fierce and unbroken, and something in his expression cracked open. Pride, fear, love. Joan. She lowered the gun. I told you I wasn't just decorative. He crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. His hands shook as they moved over her, checking for injuries, reassuring himself she was whole. You're insane. He breathed against her hair, beautiful and insane, and he pulled back, framing her face with bloody hands. Mine. You're mine, Joan Perkins. Not because my mother arranged it. Not because you had no choice. But because you fought for this family. For me. The traitor? Joan asked. Dead. Oh, Hyun-sik won't betray anyone ever again. His eyes were dark, lethal, but when he looked at her, they softened. It's over. We won. 3 weeks later, Joan stood in the estate's gardens wearing a hanbok in deep crimson silk, traditional and modern all at once. Madame Song had tears streaming down her face as she watched her son and the waitress who'd saved her life exchange vows, real ones this time. Not forced, not political, but born from blood and fire and something that felt like destiny. When Kang Yeon kissed his bride, Joan tasted promise and danger and forever on his lips. She'd come to Seoul with nothing. She'd leave it with everything: a throne, a family, and the heart of the most dangerous man in Korea. Some fairy tales are born in darkness. Some love stories are written in blood. And sometimes, the girl who throws boiling water at armed men gets to keep the empire. If this story left you breathless, if Joan and Kang Yeon's dangerous romance had you on the edge of your seat, then don't miss what comes next. Hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and smash that notification bell, because this family has more secrets to spill. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment.